Today we're going to dive deep into Rogersville, Missouri. And not just the analytics, but the very essence, the culture, what makes Rogersville, Rogersville. Moving to southern Missouri is the best thing I've ever done for my family. And no deep dive is complete without starting with just a very odd, abstract piece of historical fact. And that would obviously be that Rogersville was the raccoon capital of the world. And how does a city get that designation? Well, apparently it wasn't the living population of raccoons, but more how many pelts people were providing and accumulating and selling in Rogersville. And apparently it was a lot, because it was enough pelts were being sold out of Rogersville that it literally became the raccoon capital of the world. And that designation became so cultural that even the high school was having annual raccoon cook-offs, barbecues, I don't even know, boils, probably rotisserie. I mean, if you really want to have a good coon, you're going to be doing it rotisserie. You're going to first do a milk brine, then you're going to rotisserie that thing, and it's going to be good, because I know that's how you cook squirrel, and that's how I've cooked it, where it was like delicious. You could serve it in a restaurant. I'm just going to assume cooking coon is probably about the same. But the problem was Rogersville came up against a real issue where the town embraced the designation so much as coon capital that those cook-offs got really popular. And they got so popular that they ran out of coon to cook. And they had to buy hams. And it was right around that time that they started buying hams to replace the coons in the cook-off, and they lost their designation. And now I believe it's Pawnee, Illinois that has that designation, and will we ever get it back? I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what, I think it's what our high school kids are missing. I think we should have not just coon cooks, but we need to bring back squirrel. I think it's gonna make kids better. I think there's a direct proportionality to the amount of coon and squirrel that high school kids eat and how grounded and real they are. I think we're giving them too much ham, too much Chick-fil-A, and they've gotten soft. So in a way, that was the beginning of the farm to table energy in Rogersville, and it has very much continued today. Once we go through some analytics, I want to talk about a restaurant that we are so excited to try in Rogersville. We judged it wrongly, and I'm going to own that. And then also, I want to talk about how this restaurant, and yes, I'm a foodie, so I use food and allegories and all of that, and metaphors is part of my being. But I really truly think that this restaurant encapsulates the essence of Rogersville. So stick around to the end and we're going to talk about that. So to start digging into the analytics, I actually first wanted to deal with inventory, because although we're going to talk about price per square foot for residential homes, I also wanted to kind of shed some light on inventory, because we talk about inventory being such a big portion of cost, right? And it's kind of not. So let me dig into the numbers. So for right now, so this is a snapshot of the Rogersville market right now. So when we look at all of the history, so we're looking at just 2025, we're going to look from January 1st to present. There have been 115 properties that have either been active, are pending now, sold, they were canceled, or they expired. Also active with a contingency. We looked at those numbers. So 115 properties. And just a quick breakdown, you guys. So that means that right now we have 45 active properties. And remember, we're only looking at residential. So that's 45 properties. 2 are active with a contingency. 25 pending, 26 closed already, 15 canceled, and 2 expired. And remember, as we go through the analytics, we're going to see that canceled and expired listings are pretty much the same. Now, sometimes there's another reason why someone canceled, they just literally decided not to sell, but usually that is pretty much that the property didn't sell. They're canceling it and they're going to refresh that listing. So we're going to see similar numbers in the analytics between canceled and expired listings. So that's a total of 115 properties. And the first thing I thought was, what is that number in relation to last year? You know, is inventory going up or down? And then I was kind of curious, what if we go farther back in time? So remember, this is just a small snapshot. We're only looking at Rogersville today, but we are able to kind of, I think, probably make some generalizations about the market in general in Southern Missouri. So I took that information on inventory and then I compared it with 2024, and we're already seeing a difference, slight, but still an uptick in the market. So this time last year, 2024, so I looked at from the beginning of 2024 to what would be current. So like, you know, March 29th. To 2024. So I wanted to look at the same amount of months, right, to be able to compare those markets. And last year, for that same amount of time, there was only 95 properties that were either active or had sold, right? And we can't look at pending because those either fell out of contract or they closed when you're going back in time. In a similar vein, we had at the same time last year, 45 active properties on the market, same as this year. I thought that was interesting. 2 active with a contingency, same as this year. And what's interesting is we had 42 closed properties. So we only have 26 closed properties now, but remember, we have 25 pending. So I believe we're going to see that at this year, we are already seeing an uptick in closed properties, because really we're looking at more like, you know, 51 properties probably will have closed in comparison to 42 last year. There was only 5 canceled properties and 1 expired. So little difference, teeny uptick. And remember, last year, 2024 slowed down a little bit, and we still had a very active market here, but we noticed it, a little drop and a few months that were kind of stalling out, especially moving into those election months. And most people, that is what the theory was. But here's where we had some differences of opinion. A lot of people have hypothesized that this year is going to be slower than 2024, slower than 2023, worse analytics for the market. And so far, that is not showing for Southern Missouri. So in fact, if we dug into probably Nixa, Ozark, which we're going to do in another video, and we're actually going to cross-examine those 2 metros, because I noticed too, a lot of people moving here, it's kind of like Nixa or Ozark, which do we do, right? So we're gonna dig deep into those analytics. But just looking at Rogersville, we can see that there is an uptick. And I would say this is where we just have to hyper-focus on markets, because there are other markets right now, California, Colorado. I have quite a few clients trying to get out of Colorado and they can't sell their properties. I have quite a few clients trying to get out of Texas now, can't sell their properties. So it's interesting, right? We have a very varied market. It always has to do, you know, primarily with migration. Where are people trying to leave in groves and where are people trying to move to, right? That has so much to do, which is interesting because that goes against the grain of our concept of supply and demand and why we were seeing such inflated prices. And people, even during that time, were talking about inventory. And that may be true on like a national level, but I dug back in time because I thought, well, maybe Rogersville once had like crazy high inventory. And I went back 2018, there was, because that's really before, you know, you can say before a lot of those kind of inflated prices started to happen. And I mean, 2019 is kind of a good year to look at too, is about the same. So 109 total properties. And then I went way back in time to 2000, 68 total properties. So that doesn't really ring true for our area. And here's the truth. This is where we don't really align with analytics on a national scale. Okay, so I would say the story of Southern Missouri is really that we've always had low inventory because there's historically been low population here. There's been slow population growth until fairly recently. Really, people talk about the last 10 years, but boy, the last 5 years, whoa, it's markedly different, right? But that we've never had high inventory here. What we have when we talk about our supply and demand issue is purely about migration. You really don't see it reflected in like the local population and some crazy boom in the local population. It really is from the influx of people moving here. And that has a double-edged sword. I mean, I know there are a lot of locals who are pretty stoked that the farm they bought for $200,000 is now valued at $1.5 million. Like, that's pretty awesome in terms of your ROI, right? That's pretty good. But it is very hard, and I hear this a lot, especially for your local families who aren't handed down a legacy of land, right? They're not getting the 500 acres handed down to them. And I would say those local families are struggling just like the rest of us, where it's just very hard as a young family with inflation now and land values how they are now to survive. And it's especially hard to survive on one income. And that's why we're seeing a lot of families just have to make the decision, or at least feel that they need to make the decision to have both the mother and father working. And we are going to dig now into analytics of price per square foot. And as we dig into the lower end, the more affordable real estate, we're going to see young families in terms of price per square foot are pretty much being asked to pay the same price as high end. We're going to dig into those analytics. And before we do, I think it's important to take kind of a bird's eye view snapshot of what the real estate market looks like in Rogersville. So Rogersville is very diverse, right? Technically, most of it lies in Webster County. You've got a smaller portion, maybe a quarter of it lying in Greene County, and then a little snippet lying in Christian County, at least some of those Rogersville addresses, because an address in southern Missouri doesn't mean that you're actually anywhere near that metro. If any of you guys have noticed, that's a thing. So a snippet of those Rogersville addresses actually lie in Christian County. So, I know this is all southern Missouri, but there are cultural differences even between those counties. Definitely regulatory differences between those counties, Webster to Greene to Christian. And so Rogersville, in terms of we're looking at hyper locality, right, is fairly diverse, because of those differences. So you have seen less of that high density housing development in Rogersville, but boy, has it started happening. And if you are if you're off the 60 and you're going into all of that new development, that is where you are going to see just that super high density development. Now, I don't like it and I understand it at the same time. I wish that we could find other ways to develop, but it's difficult. And here's where I'm going to talk pro high density, is that if we don't create high density areas, we are going to literally devour all the farmland. I mean, there is merit in consolidation. And then we go, well, should we build up, right? Should we have more, kind of moving into like the high-rise apartment buildings, where then you kind of take out your view of the farmland and you turn it way more into that kind of urban feeling. And that's challenging too, because on one hand, you could potentially preserve more farmland by doing that, but it really is not what we think about as like the culture of raising a family in like a more high-rise apartment setting. So these are not easy issues. And I do feel like I've heard, there are some hateful locals that are just seething that there's people moving in here and seething that population has grown. And I think that anger is happening because at the same time that we're seeing a population growth here, we're seeing boom phases here, we're also seeing inflation on a national level that is like definitely historic. I mean, it's getting to the point where a new precedent of inflation is being set. And, you know, no, we're not to like Depression era where it takes a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. We're not there. But in terms of like the average, right? Like the American average of inflation, it is a brutal time to be a consumer, right? The producers who are figuring it out are thriving, who are figuring out how to bring down costs and still sell at a high. I mean, those people are going to do well. So here's what I would say, and I want to push back against locals that feel that anger, is that we're just in a complicated time of humanity. And maybe it's always been complicated. Maybe, you know, every era has these issues, but I do have sensitivity because we are a working family. You know, whether, yeah, we moved from out of state, you know, hate us, love us, it just is. But we are struggling as a family in this inflationary time, just like the locals are. So I was surprised to dig into the price range of $0. Obviously, there's no houses on the market for $0, but I wanted to capture the lowest of the low. And I went up all the way to $250,000 to $250K, which, yeah, that's a super wide range, but it's so hard to just like drill down and drill down and drill down on the market, because I mean, really, you could just spend your life in one little hyper localized market and just be drilling and drilling and drilling on analytics. So I had to create some sort of ranges for this video. So I was blown away looking at that range, which, you know, that is going to be a lot of senior citizens, and that's going to be a lot of working class families. It's going to be a lot of first-time home buyers, which may or may not be single people, but it's really going to be the portion of the population that has pretty much like the tightest budget, really. Of course, you're going to have some people in there that are just, you know, they are downsizing, maybe their budget isn't so tight, they're making those decisions and those sacrifices so that they have more money to spend. Those people are going to be in that price range as well. But I was blown away to find that the most expensive price per square foot in that range was $224.44. And what was that going to buy you? A 900 square foot home. Fairly new build, built in 2024. It had been lived in, but we're going to still call that, you know, a new build-ish, right? It's on a 1/4 acre. And that was surprising to me because that is pretty high dollar. Now, I looked at the finishes and it's getting hard to tell. I'm sure some of you guys will notice this too. And there's a little bit like, okay, you know how in inflationary times we start to see shrinkflation, right? Where like we used to get this pack of like organic bacon and it had like 15, 20 pieces in it, and now it has 6. Like the pack of bacon is like that. Like I can eat 6 pieces of bacon. Like, you know what I mean? We're a family of 5. Like, what is 6 pieces of bacon gonna get us? It's not gonna get us very far. We each need our own pack of bacon. Well, we're starting to see that with finishes, and I want you guys to have an eye for this too. What looks like high end and what's priced like high end, or at least that mid-high range, so we're not talking luxury, right? But like a mid-high range, it's starting to have lower grade finishes than we would expect for that price range. And I'm starting to notice that a lot with like the Rogersville, you know, $250,000 and under, a lot of new builds that look really good, and they're not bad finishes, but they're definitely not mid-grade, okay? They're kind of in this like middle ground of low to mid-grade, okay? But what I am noticing is I'm noticing square footage getting lower and lower. So we're seeing a lot more of new builds in the 900 really to 1,200, 1,300 square feet. So just like my pack of bacon's getting smaller, we're starting to see those square footages of those homes getting smaller, and certainly the lot size getting smaller, where, you know, we're seeing 0.19 0.25, quarter acre and under. So it's not going to be surprising that the most affordable square footage is an older home in Rogersville. So it's $151 per square foot. It's for sale for $205,000. And I forgot to mention the most expensive home, right? That one actually was $202,000, right? So roughly around the same. So this home is 1,357 square feet. It's on a quarter acre as well. It was built in 1989 and it truly did not look like it had upgrades. It looked clean. It didn't look shocking. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh my God, this is just unbearable of an outdated home. Probably had new paint and carpet at some point, but didn't look like that was super recent. And so not surprising that that was the most affordable home. So here's what's interesting, and this is good information for sellers. The next most affordable home was $166 per square foot. Now, it is going to probably close less than that unless there was competition, right? If it got into any kind of competition or bidding war, it probably went for full asking price. That home is actually less square feet than the more affordable home I was talking about. So that's 1,264 square feet. The price is higher, $210,000. And while I was making this video, it actually went pending. So why did that go pending over that other home? It's more expensive, it's less square feet, and it was about the same time frame. It's roughly the same age, and that is because it was better maintained. It had hardwood floors instead of like carpet and kind of that, you know, that tile, I think of it as very circa 2000. It's like, you know, the large square beige tile. I call that like the quintessential landlord tile, right? And it's like the cheapest tile that you can possibly find. And so that other home had that. With this home, really the only difference I could see, two differences: hardwood floors and newer appliances. And that was enough for them to ask for more money and sell in just a fraction of the time. So I want sellers and buyers to understand that the market really does come down to these hyper localized details and then also hyper focused finish details. And the Rogersville market is really, really strong right now. So remember we're looking at from January 1st to March 29th to just look at that, how much of 2025 we've lived. 96 properties have closed in this price range. So from $0, obviously there's none for sale for that, but up to $250,000, 96 properties. So this is where the bulk of the market lays, and it is very active. So we are going to see a lot of these properties kind of fly off the shelf, because I do want to bring up, there is only 8 active properties in this price range. And remember, for the purpose of analytics, we're only looking at properties that are on an acre or less, because when we start to look at kind of hobby farms and stuff, it becomes even harder to really look at those prices, because you have the quality of the farmland, you know, or is it forested, how far away from the town it is, how much dirt road is it on. There's so many details that lead to the desirability when you then add a larger acreage. So, but still, so these are properties that are like in town, right? Only 8 available. So very tight inventory for a market that is very, very hot. And like I said, 96 properties in this, you know, in this specific category that we're looking at have already sold. So that blows out every other year. So we're seeing huge jump in sales for this lower price range. So for the next bracket, we're going to jump up to 251,000, right? To bring us to the next tier, all the way up to 375,000. And this is where the bulk of inventory lays. And remember, I am looking at an acre or under to keep those analytics a bit more pure. And now we jump up to 19 active properties. And yes, there is a lot of buyers shopping in this price range. Probably we could safely say a bit less of your first-time home buyers. So we do see a bit of a tick down in the amount closed. So there's 53 properties that have closed in this price range, which, you know, is kind of exciting. And here's why I'm going to say why. We have so many in this area, so many young families who are super smart and are trying to become first-time home buyers right out the bat. And that really excites me because that shows me that we have a healthy culture, right? We have people who are really striving, young people who are striving in this area, and that is a good thing. So yeah, what's interesting is we have, you know, significantly, almost half the amount of homes have sold in this next price bracket. And we have, though, double the inventory. So that is interesting. We also have a lot lower of an average price per square foot. So remember, with our lowest bracket, right, our most affordable bracket, we had 8 properties on the market, and the average price per square footage of all those properties, which is very varied, is a little bit over $175 per square foot. So then you jump up to the next bracket and it goes down, right? So now we're looking up to 375,000, and that average price per square footage foot price goes down to $163.71. So here's what's interesting. You then jump up to the next bracket. So we're gonna look up to $500,000. And so if you look at 376,000 to 500,000, the price per square footage drops way down to $138.41. And as I tell people, this is where you actually have your most value in the market right now, because we did not look either to keep analytics pure. We didn't look at properties that have acreage, but you can often find them with acreage and roughly around this price point or a little bit higher, right? You might find it in the 160 range. And that is where, you know, you've got a pretty sweet deal that you could not build that. Like, you could not buy the land in Rogersville and build a home at that price point, right? So that's where the analytics of price per square footage is really interesting. So I want to then jump, right? We are going to jump to high end. So this is where it gets interesting as well, because if you go to the very low, right, up to $250,000, and then you go to the higher end, so that in southern Missouri, really anything, you know, kind of like once you get to, I would say truly for luxury is over 700,000 in this area. But, you know, definitely when you get into the million and above is like luxury. Like, we're all in agreement that that is luxury. But what we see is that the very low end and the very high end is where we see the craziest, highest price per square footage. So it's pretty wild, because for that low end, it's just that you see that, like, especially for the new builds, those builders are going to make their money. And because it's so expensive, I mean, we were seeing new builds at $224 per square foot. That you will find, you'll find luxury stuff for under $300 a square foot often in southern Missouri. And so it's pretty wild that you're paying the same for luxury as for your most affordable starter homes. So the average for, you know, moving into more of the high end and then into luxury is $267 per square foot. And we do see a bit of like differences here. One thing that I thought was really interesting is you do get into, when you get into this realm, the differences between Webster County versus Greene County, and then the style of living. So I was surprised that the highest square footage, which was $355 per square foot. And I'm going to tell you guys, that's high. I can show you some luxury builds even in Nixa and Ozark that are way below that, and they're opulent. Now, they're huge homes, so we're talking, $1 to $3 million homes, but with a lower square foot rate. And so here's what I found for that home that's 355, actually over 355, closer to $356 per square foot, is in Highland Springs. Now that makes sense. We've talked about Highland Springs as one of those, really sought after golfing communities. It starts in Springfield, but it's so massive. I can't remember how many hundreds of acres. I want to say like 600 acres, something. It moves into Rogersville, and those homes have incredible price per square foot. Now, not too bad as your HOA. You're going to pay anywhere from like $225, maybe up to $275 for your monthly HOA dues, but you do get a lot. I am not an HOA person. Okay, I tend to not be someone that would probably look at buying something like that, but I do understand why people do. It does keep property value higher, but I really do understand the golfing communities. Like, if I wasn't a bit more on the rural side, kind of ranching side, like, I want to have horses and cattle in as a senior citizen, right? If I didn't have that in me, I totally get the golfing community, because you build this network of people. You're playing pickleball, you're golfing, you've got all these activities, and it's right in this community. So you have your community, of Rogersville moving into that metro of Springfield. You're close to all the amenities and the hospitals and everything that an older person, especially more of an affluent person, would want to be near. But then you have that hyper localized community of the golfing country club, and I get that. I actually get that, because at first I didn't see that this home was in Highland Springs, and I was like, what? What is going on with this pricing? It's like a 2,000 square foot home, 2,178 square foot home, and it's $774,900, $356 per square foot. I first, just looking at it, could not figure out what was going on, and then I saw that it was in Highland Springs, and I understood, because humans will have and will always pay for that lifestyle. And it also makes sense looking at the most affordable price per square foot, which is $147 and some change. Let's call it $148, closer to $148 per square foot. And that is a home that has huge square footage, over 4,000 square feet. It is more rural, and it has just more of a country feel, well built, but not like super high-end finishes. It's not a new build, right? We're gonna go back to, built in the 90s, been updated, but nothing that feels super, super high-end. And so that's where we have that crazy, crazy range, is that if you're willing to go into more of that rural part of Rogersville, you're gonna be in Webster, you might be 30 minutes really away from Springfield in some of those areas, almost like closer to, your feeling of like Fordland and Diggins, at the very edge there of what we consider Rogersville. And that is where you're going to see a huge price drop. So we do see this wide range in Rogersville. And like I say in every video, it very much has to do with proximity to Springfield. And then we could look at it even from a more narrow lens, and it has to do with that hyper localized community. Are you in What kind of HOA? Is it gated? Are you in, a golfing country club? Are you in Highland? All of those things are gonna make huge differences in your pricing. And that brings me to the restaurant that I wanna highlight, which is Harvest in Rogersville. And we are so excited that we realized how amazing they are. And it is almost Alden's birthday, my husband, and we are gonna go there, and we are so excited. And he at first was not excited because, like me, both of us somehow thought that it was a farm to table, like vegetarian, vegan restaurant. And not to be snotty, I used to be vegan, I get it. We all make mistakes. Just joking. For me, it was a mistake. I was my least healthy when I was vegan. But that doesn't get us excited. Like, we want locally grown or harvested wild game. We want just maybe some foie gras, maybe some oysters, right? We want those animal products. And when we realized that Harvest had all that, we got very excited. And I think it might end up to be our favorite restaurant. The only one in my mind that is maybe going to be competitive is the Garrison, and I think we'll just have to do a straight challenge. Like, who wins out, Harvest or the Garrison? Both are growing a huge portion of their menu, which is amazing, and then sourcing locally like the rest of it, which is pretty incredible. I mean, it's just the flavor and the taste of something fresh is it's just different. You can taste and absorb the vitality. I feel high. Like, I don't want to be offensive, but I feel high on drugs with good food. I don't even like saying that. It's just, drugs is bad. Drugs are bad, folks. But I do feel elevated, right? Just like I feel elevated when I feel filled with spirit. I feel elevated when I eat good food, and I just know that Harvest is going to be like that. They have a quote that I feel like super sums up Rogersville. It says, "A quaint little spot not far from the city, but rooted in the country." And that is how I think of Rogersville. I think of Rogersville as kind of having it all. Like, yes, it does have that affluence and all of those just really, gorgeous, homes as you drive from Springfield out 125 and head out into more of that those expansive estates, right? I know that Rogersville is defined by that, but then you have those legacy ranches and farms that have been operated for multiple generations, and just that feeling of history. And everyone, I really recommend that you go to downtown Rogersville. It took me a while to make it out there. I didn't really realize that I hadn't seen it, and it is so cute. It just feels good. I, once again, just like eating good food, I felt elevated. I felt really inspired by downtown Rogersville. And also, when you see it, you're going to see that juxtaposition. So, it's probably, in my mind, the most desirable juxtaposition of culture and real estate is when you do have just the glory of affluence and amazing architecture combined with deeply rooted history and all that comes from that architecture, aged and weathered, but like beautifully restored architecture is so special to me. And you really see that in downtown Rogersville. And that is why you do see higher price points there, because it, more than almost any other metro, it encapsulates that element of the Ozarks, of something that is really growing in affluence and at the same time really deeply rooted in history and preserving those legacy farms and ranches. That is how I define Rogersville, and I believe what makes it so, so special. You guys, that wraps up our video. I am going to report back to you on our experience at Harvest. Yeah, we're so nerdy, we will be studying their menu, which changes all the time. So we'll probably even know like what's different on it. It's a constantly rotating menu. In fact, he calls He calls his approach hyper seasonality, which I've been saying the hyper a lot because we're drilling down, right? Well, he is drilling down on seasonality of produce and food to get everything at their peak time to consume. And that is very exciting. So I am going to give you an update on that experience, but I just pretty much know in my knower that it's going to be amazing, and it's going to emotionally tie me to Rogersville on an even more intimate level. Because I just realized for me, there's nothing more intimate than food. It's the most important element of culture. It really is. And I won't dig deep into my philosophy, but we are what we eat, and I want us to be good. So that wraps up the video. You guys, like always, all my information is in the description. You guys are reaching out to me constant, and I really look forward to helping you. I hope that if you move here, you find that your life blossoms like ours has, and that you're gonna be embraced, by this great community. We are the buckle of the Bible Belt, so get ready, right? There's a lot of closeness that means. Like people are gonna want to love you up here, and for some of you that is gonna be weird. We have been loved by our neighbors like we were never loved by our family. So for us, it's not just been good for our kids, it's literally healed our souls as well to be loved that well. So yeah, Southern Missouri, for us, there's been nothing like it. Until next time, you guys, see ya.